The two songs are unrelated but brought together by history, written at two different points of time by two of the greatest literary geniuses of our country. To this audience, their names do not bear repetition. It is important to underline that even though one is called the national anthem and the other is called the national song, Jana, Gana, Mana, the national anthem, and Vande Mataram, the national song, both occupy the same pedestal in the national consciousness. This was made absolutely clear in unambiguous terms by the first President of India, Rajendra Prasad, the day the Constitution of India was signed, November 24th, 1950. This is what Rajendra Prasad said. This is one of the few quotations that I have to offer to you. The composition consisting of the words and music known as Jana Gana Mana is the national anthem of India. And the song Vande Mataram, which has played a historic part in the struggle for freedom, shall be honored equally with Jana Gana Mana and shall have equal status with it, unquote. I don't think this leaves any space for any kind of confusion and creating a sort of an artificial, otiose distinction between the status of the two songs. I want to spend the rest of this evening's talk trying to analyze the context as well as the significance of the two songs. I will begin with Vande Mataram since it was an earlier song for simple chronological reasons. It was originally written, and this is a very important point, not just a simple pedantic point. It was originally written as a stand-alone poem of 12 lines, sometime between 1872 and 1875. Now we are on strong grounds regarding the dating because of a number that is mentioned in the 9th line of that 12-line poem. That number in the 9th line is Shoptokoti, which is 7 crores or 70 million, which was the population of the Bengal presidency according to the census of 1871. Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay was very familiar with this census because he had written an essay in 1872 on the population statistics of this census. Equally importantly, in 1907, this makes it even more specific. In 1907, Aurobindo Ghosh wrote, it was 32 years ago that Bankim wrote his great song. So 1907, 32 years ago, you get an even more precise date. And thirdly, another kind of circumstantial evidence which is more relevant for students of style and literature. In 1874, Bankim Chandra wrote an essay called Amar Durga Utsav, My Durga Puja, which was published in the journal that he edited, Bongo Darshan. And in this essay, he used ideas and images that carry remarkable resemblances with the ones that were used in Vande Mataram. So Vande Mataram remained an unpublished poem till in 1881, Bankim Chandra decided to insert this in the novel that he wrote, the novel called Anandamot. But he just didn't simply insert the 12 lines, he added 14 more lines to the 12. And what is very significant is that in the first 3 editions of this novel, the first 12 lines are put within quotation marks to clearly demarcate it from the later editions of the 14 lines. It's only after Bankim's death that these quotation marks were removed. But there is also another reason for these quotation marks, because there is a thematic difference between the original first 12 lines and the subsequent 14 lines that were added. The first 12 lines, in fact, they form 2 stanzas, are a very evocative description of the motherland, which is identified with Bengal, her lushness, her beauty, her strength, and how these combine to produce the loyalty of the people and the strength to oppose an enemy. The poem in the second, the 14 lines that was added, continues in the same vein, but makes a very, very clear identification of the mother with the goddess Durga, with Kamala, that is a synonym for the goddess Lakshmi, and with Bak, synonym for the goddess Saraswati. There is thus a clear shift in the register of the 2 parts. It is important to keep this shift in mind. It will acquire some relevance as I go on with my talk. Outside the readership of Anandamot, the song remained unknown till Rabindranath Tagore set it to tune in the Rag Desh and sang it in the Congress session of 1896, which was held in Calcutta. There is evidence that even before this public debut of the song, Rabindranath had sung it in the presence of Bankim Chandra himself and had won the author's approval. This must have been before 1894, because that's the year Bankim Chandra died. It is also worth noting that Rabindranath set to tune and sang solo voice singing in 1896, the Congress session. He set to tune and sang only the first 12 lines. He made this explicit in a letter to Jawaharlal Nehru in 1937. This is what he wrote to Nehru. Quote, "The privilege of originally setting its first stanza to the tune was mine when the author was still alive, and I was the first person to sing it before a gathering of the Calcutta Congress." Unquote. But this song acquired dramatic dimensions in the protests that followed Curzon's decision to partition Bengal in 1905. Protests that historians have called and we know as the Swadeshi movement. The song became the theme song of the movement, as well as the first 2 words actually became its rallying cry. Many young men went to the gallows with those 2 words on their dying lips. In fact, very interesting point of detail, the movement, the Swadeshi movement began in the middle of October, 13th October, 1905, with a procession right after sunrise. A procession that proceeded from the banks of the Ganges with Rabindranath Tagore at the very forefront of the procession, and the procession sang Vande Mataram in chorus, with Rabindranath leading the singing. So this is how the song became an integral part of the Indian national movement and of India's struggle for freedom from British rule. It is somewhat of an irony, I think, that a beautiful song, mostly in very Sanskritized Bengali, the poem by no means is very easy to comprehend. When it became a vehicle of politics and political protest, it also became the subject of a controversy. But this controversy has to be located within a phase, a particular phase of the Indian national movement. From the early 1920s, the national movement under the Indian National Congress, as well as the various other strands of the movement, all of them not completely aligned to the Indian National Congress or not always advocating ahimsa as Gandhi was doing when he was leading the Indian National Congress in the non-cooperation movement, civil disobedience movement. But all the various strands were trying in their different manifest ways to draw into the fold of the national movement all Indians, irrespective of their religious beliefs, irrespective of whatever creed, caste they belong to. The Indian national movement was supposed to represent all Indians. That is why it was called the Indian national movement. Indians were united against British rule. This was, if I might put it like this, the raison d'etre of the Indian national movement. But there were voices of discordant, or there were discordant voices. Against this momentum of unity stood the Muslim League, which believed that the Congress-led national movement did not and could not represent the interests and aspirations of the Muslims. According to the Muslim League, particularly according to Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the Congress was a Hindu organization and therefore could only speak for and could only aspire to represent the interests of Hindus. This opposition was sharpened by the Government of India Act 1935, which permitted provincial elections. Naturally, for reasons, or for electoral reasons, the Congress wanted to retain and win Muslim support. And the Muslim League wanted all Muslims to be under its own separatist flag. It was in this context that certain sections of the Vande Mataram song became controversial. We must bear this context in mind. Many Muslims argued that the later sections of the song, the sections that Bankim Chandra had added for Anandamot, were openly idolatrous and therefore unacceptable to the Muslims. Before I go any further, there is one small digression I want to make, but it is an important digression. Bankim Chandra, contrary to popular belief, was not an advocate of idolatry. He wrote in 1874, this around the time that he is writing Vande Mataram, the first 12 lines at least. This is what he wrote, quote, "Idolatry is anti-science. Wherever idolatry prevails, knowledge does not advance. Idolatry is against growth of the human self. It constrains man's mind and diminishes the growth, improvement, and development of human personality." Unquote. Again, a very clear statement that not advocating idolatry. To return to the controversy, both Subhash Bose and Jawaharlal Nehru were admirers of Vande Mataram and the role it had played in the freedom movement. But they were seriously concerned in the specific context of the 1937 elections that parts of the song could potentially alienate Muslim voters. Bose and Nehru independently asked Rabindranath for guidance and advice, the leading literary figure, especially because the song is in Bengali, the natural port of call for both of them. The latter's advice was also very clear. He had no problems with the first 12 lines of the song. He wrote to Nehru, "To me, the spirit of tenderness and devotion expressed in its first portion, the emphasis it gave to beautiful and beneficent aspects of our motherland, made a special appeal. So much so that I found no difficulty in disassociating it from the rest of the poem and from those portions of the book of which it is a part, with all the sentiments of which, brought up as I was in the monotheistic ideals of my father, I could have no sympathy." Unquote. He went on to add, "I freely concede that the whole of Bankim's Vande Mataram poem, read together with its context, is liable to be interpreted in ways that might wound Muslim susceptibilities. But a national song, though derived from it, which has spontaneously come to consist only of the first two stanzas of the original poem, need not remind us every time of the whole of it, much less of the story with which it was accidentally associated. It has acquired a separate individuality and an inspiring significance of its own, in which I see nothing to offend any sect or community, in which I see nothing to offend any sect or community." Unquote. Rabindranath thus made a distinction, a clear distinction between the two parts of the song. This is why I emphasize the shift in the register between the first 12 lines and the rest of the 14 lines. And thus he recommended to Nehru and Bose that the first 12 lines should be sung without in any way endangering the unity of all Indians. The Congress Working Committee, let it be emphasized that this was a Congress Working Committee decision, not the decision of any one individual, however remarkable that individual, accepted this recommendation. Following on the footsteps of Rabindranath's recommendation and the CWC's decision, Rajendra Prasad in November 1950 announced what I just read out at the beginning of this lecture, that it should be honored equally with Jana Gana Mana and have equal status with it. It is through this process and its identification with the national movement that Vande Mataram became and remains India's national song. I now turn to the other song, Jana Gana Mana, the national anthem. But before I do that, I also need to place this particular song or poem as it first was, like Vande Mataram, within a particular conjuncture, context of Tagore's own life and Tagore's own creativity. In the 1890s, Rabindranath was given the responsibility of by his father to go out into rural Bengal to look after the family's landed estates. The Tagores had enormous, very big post-permanent settlement. In 1793, the Tagores had very large landed estates, mostly in what is present-day Bangladesh. They also had landed estates in Orissa. But Rabindranath was sent to eastern Bengal, as it was then, to look after the landed estates there. This is Rabindranath's first exposure to the reality of rural India. If I can use a phrase, this is Rabindranath's discovery of Bengal. And he, as you know, Bangladesh is crisscrossed by river. Some of them very large, especially the Padma. And a large part of the travel that Rabindranath undertook in this period was on boats. But sometimes he had to anchor, moor those boats. And from the boats, he could observe what was happening on the banks of the river. Sometimes he got off the boat to walk through the lanes of the villages to see what the people were doing, the kind of activities that they were engaged in. He thus came face to face for the first time in his life with the stark realities of the lives of the common people of Bengal and the indifference, the sheer indifference of the colonial state to their suffering and to their welfare. He depicted this world, this rural world that he had observed in a series of outstanding short stories, which he put together in 2 volumes called Golpo Guccho, collection of stories. In my humble view, these contain some of the greatest short stories to be written in any language in the world. I would place it next to Chekhov, Guy de Maupassant anytime. Not just because I'm a Bengali. When the Swadeshi movement started, we have already seen, Tagore was involved in the Swadeshi movement, completely involved. In fact, he was one of the leaders of this movement. And this coincided with a remarkable burst of creativity on his part. A large part of this creativity was poetry, but more importantly, songs that he wrote. Songs that were also sung. Ezra Pound, when Rabindranath was being nominated for the Nobel Prize by Yeats, Ezra Pound made the very famous moving comment, Tagore sang Bengal into a nation. But that involvement with the Swadeshi movement came to an end, an abrupt end, an end that caused Tagore very deep anguish and pushed him into a period of deep introspection. He withdrew from the Swadeshi movement. Why? Because he could not accept the violence and the coercion that was becoming part of the movement. Not just young men and women taking to the politics of assassination, pistol and bomb, but also because he saw that one of the most powerful instruments that the Swadeshi movement had started to oppose British rule, the imposition of boycott, was often going hand in hand with coercion. People were being forced to boycott rather than participating in the boycott out of their own consciousness, awareness, and involvement in the movement. And sometimes when people refused to boycott, they were severely punished by having their houses, their shops, their cloth burnt. Rabindranath could not accept this violence and coercion. This went against everything that he believed and everything that he stood for. So he withdrew from the movement, much as he had in fact predicted in a song that he wrote during the Swadeshi movement, 1905. Jodi tor ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে তবে একলা চলো রে. If nobody answers to your call, walk alone. So he decided to walk alone. He decided to walk alone. And never again did he get himself involved in the hurly-burly of politics. Not that, I want to emphasize this point, not that he became apolitical. He did not become actively involved in politics, but all the time he was writing about, reflecting on the political ambience or the political life of the country. The most powerful expression of this is his renunciation of the knighthood after the massacre at Jallianwala Bagh. The first person to react to that massacre, in which he actually wrote to the governor of Bengal that I cannot accept an honor from a barbaric regime, a regime that can fire and kill an unarmed people can be nothing else but barbaric. So he remained involved in politics. Or let me put it a little more sharply, he remained political. But to come back to this phase of withdrawal, this is a phase of, in Tagore's life, a contemplative phase, a phase in which he is deeply thinking about the nature of Indian civilization, the nature of Indian culture, and also following out of that contemplation, it's also a period of outstanding creativity. And we will take 3 examples of that outstanding creativity. Jana Gana Mana is one of those examples. Jana Gana Mana is written precisely in 1911, in this period. Now, 1911, in more ways than one, is a rather pivotal moment for Bengal, the history of Bengal, as well as the history of India. The most trivial of those pivots is the fact that it marked the first visit of a reigning monarch of the British Empire, George V, to India. George V was welcomed in India by a grand darbar in Delhi. At that darbar, the official formal part of the darbar, as it came to an end, George V suddenly got up from the makeshift throne that had been created for him, walked up and grabbed a piece of paper from the hands of the then Viceroy, Lord Hardinge, and announced in a very loud voice. He made 2 announcements in a very loud voice. One was that the partition of Bengal would stand annulled. So Bengal was no longer a partitioned province. And the second, having given the carrot with the right hand, with his left hand, he gave the stick. He said, the capital of British India would be shifted from Calcutta to Delhi. This is, as I said, this is the most trivial part of 1911. What? The Kaisar-e-Hind, as the head of the British Empire was called, what he did. This is December 1911. And as you know, the Indian National Congress sessions were held at the end of December, always. Traditionally, that's the date. It's shifted now, changed. Boxing Day, it would start on the December 26th, and it would end by tea time, December 28th. That year, 1911, it was to be held in Calcutta, that session. And the Congress at that time was dominated by a group that historians have called moderates. Why moderates? Because they did not believe in any kind of active pressure on the British government to bring about the freedom of India. They believed in petition, appeals, mendicancy, so on and so forth. So therefore, their politics were those of a very moderate variety. We don't want to annoy you, hurt you in any way. We are appealing to your good sense. You are good, civilized people, members of Albion Just, so we are appealing to your good sense. So the moderates decided, coincidentally, after the session of the Indian National Congress ending on the 28th of December, the turn of the year, the British monarch, the British emperor, was supposed to visit Calcutta. And the moderates decided that to kind of preempt that visit, in the Congress session, a special song would be sung to welcome George V. And a very important member of the moderate section of the Congress, who was a very close friend of Rabindranath, went to Rabindranath requesting him to write such a song of welcome to George V, welcoming George V. This request enormously irked Rabindranath. Given, it's understandable, given his involvement in the Swadeshi movement and some of the criticisms he had made in his essays about the neglect that the colonial state had, contempt even for the common people. In 1937, some years later, from 1911, a very close associate of Rabindranath wrote to him asking about this incident. Is it true that somebody had approached you to write such a song of welcome for George V? Tagore replied to that letter. That letter is there in the archives in Rabindra Bhavan, and it bears reading out. This is what he wrote, Tagore. Someone well placed in government circles, who was a friend of mine, specially requested me to compose a song in praise of the Emperor George V. I was amazed at this request, and the amazement was laced with anger. I was being a little euphemistic by saying he was irked by the request. The word he uses is anger. It was laced with anger. It was as a strong reaction, an opposition to this request, that I proclaimed the victory of the champion of India's destiny in the song Jana Gana Mana Adhinayako. This champion is the eternal charioteer and is the guide of the travelers on the hazardous path of the rise and fall, and is in the hearts of the multitude and their guide. That such an eternal charioteer of humanity's destiny cannot be George V or George VI or any other George was perceived by my loyalist friend because despite his devotion to the emperor, he was not bereft of intelligence. I think we have buried a canard there that Jana Gana Mana Adhinayako was written in praise of George V. The Congress session began in 1911 in Calcutta, as had become the practice since 1896, with the singing of Vande Mataram. First day, that's how the session was inaugurated, as it had been, in fact, since 1896. The second day's session began with the singing of Jana Gana Mana. First time that this song is being sung, and it was sung in chorus. And the nationalist press in Calcutta, Amrita Bazar Putrika, Surendranath Banerjee's newspaper called The Bengali, hailed this song as a song of benediction. Mark the use of that word, benediction. The text of the song was published for the first time. I am making a distinction between the singing of the song and the publication of the text. For the first time in January 1912, in a journal called Tattabodhini Putrika, which Tagore himself edited and which was the journal of the Adi Brahmo Samaj. The text was published under the rubric Brahmo Sangeet, not as an eulogy to an individual. On January 25th, which that year, 1912, marked Maghotsav, a particularly auspicious day for the Brahmos, the song was sung in the Tagore household under the direction of Tagore himself. And this is also the occasion that the musical notation of the song, or Swarolipi of the song, was prepared by Dineन्द्rnath Tagore, who was the grandson of Tagore's eldest brother. So this is the history, the context of the writing of the song and the first performances of this song as well. But the song, just as Vande Mataram received a dramatic salience because of the Swadeshi movement, Jana Gana Mana also received a dramatic dimension when Subhash Bose, far away from India, in Berlin, in November 1942, actually had Jana Gana Mana rendered in Hindi and sung, and he declared it to be India's national anthem. The phrase national anthem to describe Jana Gana Mana is a Bose coinage. Just like, digression again, Mahatma Gandhi is the father of the nation is a Bose coinage. Again in the 1940s, supposed to be anti-Congress, according to common parlance and common advocates of Bose. But remarkable, who were involved in this Hindi rendering of Jana Gana Mana? It just measures the distance India has traveled. The work of rendering it into Hindi was done by Abid Hassan, Mumtaz Hussain, and the scoring for a band was done by Ram Singh Thakur, two Muslims and a Hindu. Now, immediately after independence, August, September 1947, there was a pressure on the government from various international fora. So what is the song that represents India? Are we still going to sing God Save the King? It was an absurdity because India had no king at that point of time. India was on the process of becoming a republic. And this acquired, or it came to a head when there was a request from the United Nations General Assembly that please tell us, what is India's national anthem? The request came, of course, to the Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru. And Nehru said, for the time being, please use Jana Gana Mana as the national anthem because we have a score for it. Please use that, but I also want to emphasize, he said, that only the Constituent Assembly can decide what is going to be or which song is going to be India's national anthem. And we have already seen how on the day the Constitution of India was signed, the Constituent Assembly made that decision. Once the signing was over, this is also an important piece of information. Once the signing was done, a member of the Constituent Assembly, Ananda Sayanam Iyengar, requested that the assembled members should collectively sing Jana Gana Mana. The singing was led by Purnima Banerjee, one of the 15 women members of the Constituent Assembly. This is the formal debut of Jana Gana Mana as the national anthem. The day the Constitution of India was signed is also the formal debut of the singing of Jana Gana Mana as the national anthem. And I want to move, just as I did in the case of Vande Mataram, to the contents of this song. First point, often not remembered, what we sing as the national anthem is only the first verse of a rather longish poem. Just like we sing the first 12 lines of a 28-line Vande Mataram. And mysterious reasons, the Home Ministry decided and continues to abide by that decision that this first verse would have to be sung in 52 seconds. Why 52 and not 60 or not 42? We don't know. Something sacred about 52, who knows? There's no fathoming the reasoning of the state. This first verse, all of us know it by heart. We have heard it so many times, sung it so many times, muttered it within ourselves so many times as the band plays it. This first verse hails the dispenser of India's destiny, who is the captain of the minds of the people. It then describes the various regions of India and its natural phenomena, and goes on to say that over this entire expanse, the name of the dispenser of India's destiny rises. Its blessings are prayed for and its victory sung. The end of the verse introduces the refrain, Jayo He, which is repeated at the end of every verse. The first verse makes it clear that this is the song for India and India's history and destiny. The second verse celebrates India's demographic and religious plurality. Every day, the song says, this message of tolerance is heard, and the people of all the faiths string a garland of love for Bharater Bhagyo Vidhata. The people are one and united. The third verse is about history, the difficult path traversed by the people of India over epochs. Bhagyo Vidhata is now described as the eternal charioteer, guiding the people, and during times of travail, raising their hopes with the sounds of conch shells. Thus the charioteer shows the path. Continuing on the same register of history, the song speaks of the periods of darkness when the country seemed to have lost its consciousness. But the dispenser of destiny was awake and steadfast. Thus, the song says, the tender and compassionate mother acted as a savior during times of terror and fear. The last verse, the fifth, sings of the end of the night as the sun rises in the eastern hills. And nurtured by the mother's compassion, sleeping India awakes with its head at her feet. In this final verse, in fact, in the final lines of the song, there is a significant alteration in the refrain. All the previous verses had Bharato Bhagyo Vidhata. But here, Bharato Bhagyo Vidhata was preceded by the word Rajeshwar, King of Kings, or the God of Kings. This is a very bold summary of a very rich and evocative song. But some points need to be underlined. First, the belief embedded in Tagore and this song that there is this entity, Bharato Bhagyo Vidhata, that commands India's destiny. And it is the blessings of this Vidhata that enable India and Indians to navigate the passage of history. The song is an ode to that entity. 2, the song is about the spirit of India, the unity in spite of the diversities. This harmony is willed by the Bharata Bhagyo Vidhata. There is no doubt in Tagore's mind about the oneness and the unity and the harmony that resides in hearts of India and Indians. 3, the word Rajeshwar in the final refrain demands some kind of explanation and elaboration. Please allow me to do that, even if I deviate from the text of this song. 1 year before he wrote Jana Gana Mana, in 1910, Rabindranath wrote a play with a very simple title, Raja. When he translated it, translated it into English, he gave the English title to the play, King of the Dark Chamber. That's how it's known in English. You could translate it just as king, because Raja is just king. Now, this is a very strange play, because that king, that Raja, never appears on stage. He's never present on stage, leaving his queen, who's called Sudarshana, completely bewildered. And she is pleading. You can hear the king, but can't see the king. She is pleading with the king, please show yourself, I want to see you. But he doesn't appear. In the second scene of this play, Tagore introduced a song sung by an elderly member of the community. The character has no name, he is just called Thakurda, grandpa. He sings this song, and the song's opening lines are, Amra shobai raja, amader ei rajar rajotte. We are all kings in the kingdom of our king. Where everyone is a king, there is no need for a king. Tagore, I would like to suggest, is saying that there is a king within the heart, within the chamber of every individual's heart. It is that king that gives that individual autonomy, that makes that individual. He's also gesturing towards a unique kind of sovereignty, captured by the word Rajeshwar. He hailed the victory of the Rajeshwar in every sovereign individual's heart and consciousness. A realm where everyone is a king. I read this as a suggestion towards popular sovereignty. One last point about the contents of this song, and I'll move a little bit away in my final concluding comments. Up to the penultimate verse, the fourth verse, up to the fourth verse, the identity of Bharata Bhagya Vidhata is ungendered. Though you might argue that the word Udhinayak, captain, suggests a male entity. But this uncertainty disappears in the penultimate verse, where the Bhagya Vidhata is described as the tender and compassionate mother. Snehomoyi tumi mata. Tagore is, contrary to his own religious beliefs and his own sense of piety, where he worshipped a Nirakar Ishwar, an attributeless God, Tagore is buying into a very significant strand of nationalist consciousness and nationalist creativity, which saw the mother as the country, and the country as the mother. There are many songs that he wrote in the Swadeshi period that also echo this, bringing together of the mother and the country. Echoing, of course, Bankim Chandra's Vande Mataram. One last from the same period. Raja I have spoken about, Jana Gana Mana I have spoken about. Now talking about the mother as the country as the mother. In 1910, Tagore also wrote a novel. Many people think it's his greatest novel. There might be controversy or discussion about that, but that it is his longest novel is indisputable. The novel is called Gora. Just to summarize Gora, when we meet Gora in the novel, he's a young man of a particular kind. He's a very, very steadfast, in fact, I would say, strident Hindu, completely committed to the notion of service, Sheba. And he spends most of his time, even though he lives in Calcutta, his parents, his family lives in Calcutta, he spends most of his time in the rural world of Bengal, working among the poor and reflecting perhaps his own views or his own observations of rural Bengal. Tagore makes Gora aware of the poverty, the discrimination, the exploitation that is running amok in rural Bengal. The scales of innocence and belief are beginning to fall from Gora's eyes. When something very poignant, if not tragic, happens. His father takes very seriously ill and the doctors say that this is terminal. He probably will never recover. And his father, in consultation with Gora's mother, who is called very significantly Anandamoyi, decide that the time has come to reveal to Gora the real story of his birth. Why? Because if he is not told the real story of his birth, when his father dies, Gora will perform the last rites as a very strong believer in Hindu rituals. What is the story of his birth? And Gora is told this by his quote-unquote parents. He was born in Itawa in that fateful summer of 1857 when North India was engulfed by a rebellion. His parents were Irish. And his father was killed by the rebels. His mother was heavily pregnant. And she had a maid. This Irish lady, heavily pregnant, had a maid who came from an underprivileged, what today we would call a Dalit background. And this maid took this heavily pregnant lady to Anandamoyi and said, "Ma, just give her shelter." And Anandamoyi gives her shelter. And she dies at childbirth. And from that moment, from the moment that this child came out of the mother's womb, Anandamoyi received Gora, brought up Gora as her son. Gora knew Anandamoyi to be his mother. Now, he has to face this reality that the two persons he thought to be his biological parents are not actually either his father or his mother. He rushes out of the house. Naturally, this is a traumatic revelation, but returns very soon. Returns very soon to his mother and tells her. Tagore adds this as a kind of addendum to the novel. It's called Porishishto edition. He comes to his mother, comes to Anandamoyi, sits next to her and says, "Ma, all these years I have been looking for my motherland. I have been looking for my motherland outside, when actually my mother was at home. You are my Bharatbarsha. Ma, tumi amar Bharatbarsha. You are my Bharatbarsha. Why? Because you are full of compassion. You have no prejudices. You do not discriminate." He uses these words. You are full of compassion. You have no prejudices. You do not discriminate. You are my Bharatbarsha. Now, in this novel, the identification of the mother with the country is actually embodied. It is no longer a figurative presence. It is in the presence of Anandamoyi. That word Ananda is very evocative. And I will end with this. Meera Behen, Madeline Slade as she was, this daughter of a British admiral, when she got to know the life and the activities of Gandhi, came out to India to work with Gandhi, to stay in his ashram in Sabarmati. Gandhi gave her the name Meera. And in the ashram, therefore, she was known as Meera Behen. And that's how we know her. Hardly anybody remembers her as Madeline Slade. She, in 1929, wrote to Rabindranath, "What is this relationship that you two have? Bapu and you. What are the two of you? How do you relate?" And Rabindranath wrote in reply, "Mahatma Ji is the prophet of tapasya. I am the poet of Ananda." Tapasya leads, when you fulfill your tapasya, it leads to the ultimate ecstasy, which stands for Ananda. Hence, Anandamoyi, which is India. Thank you.